when y'all bring up the whales online, it really has very little to do with the whales. It has everything to do with the whales being a dog whistle for so many other much more sinister things that I think a lot of people are not realizing what they're doing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. It is a gloomy Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. I'm Jer Stays, and joining me on the line is
Norris Howard.
Another Wednesday, and it seems like the number one question around Metro Detroit is, have you turned your heat on yet?
I know. It's crazy. We went from 80-something a couple weeks ago to what fall is actually supposed to feel like. Hoodie weather is back in full effect, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. It seems like every year we go through the trending topics, and right about this time, it seems like the entire discussion is the weather.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, us Michiganders here, we love talking about the weather, I think more so because it changes so much and it always is something to talk about. But one thing I always say every year is like, why are people so surprised by it? Like it's the same thing happens every year, y'all. Like, whoa.
Like if this is your first time from California or Florida or Texas or something, I'll get it, right? Maybe you need to run to the store and get yourself some Carhartts or something. But this is coming on 4 decades for me.
Listen, it's October. It's supposed to be chilly. That is what October does. I don't know why we're all shocked by this, but yet and still it catches unwitting Michiganders off guard.
I didn't mean to, but I did kind of make it rain on social media yesterday. I really didn't mean to poke the bear as much as I did, Norris, but I did. I did it bad.
Yeah.
Because you saw the tweet. I'm sure you saw the things because
the
whale mural got covered again, and so whale discourse is back.
Oh, my God. Why? Okay. I have 2 questions. First and foremost, why, and this is a serious question to all the humans out there in Metro Detroit, why do y'all care so much? Because I'm going to be honest with you. Growing up here, the whales went up on the building. Sure, that's cool, I suppose. Nobody's fighting for the whales. This is not a line in the sand for anybody who grew up in the city. And listen, I can get it. It sucks when people's art is covered up, but I don't know, cry me a river to the litany of graffiti artists and muralists across the city over the past, 50 years who've had their murals and art covered up. I don't know. Why is this the polarizing issue that it is? I don't understand. Please, someone give me an answer. Please.
Well, I am going to talk about this in our Substack, but I got to tell you, I think it's just the mere exposure effect. It's this idea that when people see something a lot, they like it. And that is just how advertising works. And that's how anything works in general. And look, I'm all for art. The whales are not my favorite. I will fully admit that. But I don't want to see things covered up. On the other hand, I'm also like, it's a pretty lucrative corner for a billboard. And I get why the owner is not going to pass up on what's going to be a lot, and I mean a lot of money for that thing. And actually, the owner recently died of the building. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to see what goes forward. But these ads have been around for years. And I don't like the new ad. I far liked Phil Simpson's ad a lot more with the smiles. And I'll tell you, I had your same apathy spending so much time around the city. I've had that for years. But how people did Phil Simpson, somebody who honestly is a man of service and does a lot of things, it tells me that, go have any other wall you want. Well, here's the thing. No other wall in Detroit gets 80-plus games of broadcast television, 1 million pairs of eyes on it. That wall matters. And although it's an ad, and I don't really love ads covering up murals, I'm not a fan of that. I know that it's probably going to happen. So I also kind of like that there was a little bit of representation.
Yeah, and that's why I think the whole whale conversation takes a more sinister tone sometimes when it's being discussed, especially by those who are not city residents. And let me just also reframe. from just using that as a blanket term for black people, because I mean, there are non-black people who live in the city, but let's just be frank. There's an 80% chance if you live in the city, you black. So city residents, that was just cooler. It was just, oh, wow, some more representation for us in art downtown, even if it is temporary. That's cool, but at the same time, I don't think any artist would appreciate having their art covered up. But when your art is a permanent fixture of the building, essentially, and the building, as you said, is such a lucrative piece of real estate for advertising, it's going to happen. It's not a should it, but it will. It's going to happen. So I think being this bent out of shape about it is kind of, I don't want to say short-sighted, but I think it just reeks of people taking their familiarity and their quote-unquote comfort. Because let's be honest, the whales are an extension of people's comfort with downtown. People who live in the suburbs, people from outside of Detroit, they see the whales and they go, oh, that's that building that I see on TV all the time. Every city has that. Every city has those landmarks that if you're not from there, it gives you kind of a weird comfort because it's familiar and recognizable to you. That has no hold over me as, somebody who grew up in the city. I don't care. It sucks, but I mean, we fronting like the whales will be there forever. They might not. So I don't know, man. It just feels like there are so many other hills to die on, and this is not one of them for me.
Some of the comments, too, look, are ridiculous. There are people literally saying that failed city, failed leadership. And then other people who are, which of course, you know who that guy is, right? That guy's mega for sure. Because when I used to cover Detroit for the Detroit Regional Chamber, I learned that there was like a concentrated, orchestrated, right-wing agenda online to trash Detroit and every democratically run city, when in reality, both parties can screw up a city and both parties can kind of make a city run, in my opinion. When it comes on the local level. But I noticed that concerted effort, and now I've been aware of it now for 10 plus years, that it's a punching bag, and that makes me feel real gross. The other side is, well, this is the worst thing ever that could happen for the city. Really? I mean, tell me you've never been to Detroit outside of a Tiger game without telling me you've never been to Detroit outside of a Tiger game.
Yeah,
like at the end of the day, buying a double daiquiri isn't like helping Detroit. It's helping Chris Ilitch. It's not of service. Have fun. It's fine. But like this whole idea that going to a Tigers game, you're doing some like great civic act. No, I'm sorry. That's not service. That's going and having fun. And that's great. But like, you don't get a medal for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, listen, I've always been the one that says, listen, I want people to come and spend their money in Detroit. And so, that's fantastic and that's wonderful and that's appreciated. But also at the same time, I'm not going to tell New Yorkers how to run New York, even though I seen a man pull his trousers down and piss in the middle of the subway. Listen, I'm not going to tell you how to run your city. If that's how you want to run your city, that's you. I decided to come here and spend my money in it. That's it.
Well, especially if you're not someone of service, right? Like, I mean, cities are hubs, and there's always a lot of people who impact the city don't live in the city, right? Like, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
But they're putting their time, their treasure, whatever. There is this overtone that feels gross as a longtime city resident that I don't think suburbanites understand because they kind of just blindly go into it. And it's like, it's always been that way for them. And this just highlights, like, in a way, that inequality, right? Like, because I live near the Blackout Walls murals, and no one's going to, like, I have driven around the city a lot. Nobody cares about any other mural online. They'll hit a couple of likes or whatever, but nobody cares about any other mural online like they do the whales. And I think
because it's visible.
Yeah. So, it's tough. It's something where I wish there were some changes. But yeah, I guess we have an unpopular opinion about the whales, Norris.
It's not so much, and I'm going to be honest, and you alluded to it. The issue that people have with this, when y'all bring up the whales online, it really has very little to do with the whales. It has everything to do with the whales being a dog whistle for so many other much more sinister things that I think a lot of people are not realizing what they're doing, because the issue was arisen because of, the art from Rocket and the local artists, and everybody lost their dang on minds. So sometimes also, before you comment, think about what the context of your comments are and go from there. Because for me, a lot of it just feels like trying to impose your sort of standards onto a place you don't live. And that's not fair.
But Norris, to me, kind of the definition of privilege is not having to think about that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right, we got a lot of feedback from recent episodes. Go figure. I'm going to play a couple of voicemails. First, we'll do one voicemail, then we'll do some text feedback. And I'll tell you, Norris, some of the feedback was not what we were expecting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Let's do the first one.
Okay.
What's up, Jared and Daily Detroit family? I just wanted to say I enjoyed Wednesday's show about the psychedelic invasion and today's show about the apartment amenities down there on the Warren Corridor. You guys keep up the good work. I really enjoy your show. Love you guys.
So, I mean, that's a pretty warm one.
What? Wow. It's not all hatred. That's fantastic. I really appreciate it. I actually thought we were going to get a lot of hate for the psychedelics show. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for the feedback.
Actually, some of the text feedback that I got around that, a lot of people thankful for kind of showing that line. And there's almost a lesson that was drawn from that of like, hey, maybe I shouldn't think about selling this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to relitigate the mushrooms thing, but at the same time, people just got to be intelligent when it comes to this stuff. I'm not telling people to do or don't do. I don't care what you do at home as long as it doesn't harm other people. But just understand what the law is and be prepared for the consequences if you want to take it that route.
One commenter, BDMC, if you have ever lived in a huge city, it puts things in perspective. Man, I have lived in inner city Chicago for 15 years now, and Detroit feels like a tiny little hick town comparatively. I do not mean that in a bad way, as I am moving back in 3 weeks.
It does. I always said Detroit is the smallest, is the biggest small city or the smallest big city ever, right? Because here's what people don't understand, especially if you're an African American who grew up in the city of Detroit. When you think about the great migrations of the 20s and 40s, you think about how many people were able to come up to Southeast Michigan and Flint and other areas up here in the Rust Belt. People brought families. It wasn't just, individual dudes. Like a lot of families came up here. A lot of people started families up here. And so you have this huge core of people that planted roots in this region. And therefore, you have a ton of extended family. You probably, Jeremy and you, before we knew each other, are probably only removed by like 4 people. And that's just how it works in Southeast Michigan and in Metro Detroit, because so many people worked in the plants, so many people worked in the auto industry. Even if they weren't in the plants, they worked in the white collar aspects of the big 3, and then expand that into, the healthcare system that's here that is also huge. And people also don't talk about that as how large of an employer the Southeast Michigan healthcare systems are. And so, yeah, it has a small town vibe because I can go all the way to the east side and still potentially run into somebody who I'm related to. Like, that's pretty crazy.
I mean, obviously, you and I, before we officially met, were 1 degree of separation through like 40 people. But I think about how your dad told me how he worked at that one hospital. My uncle worked at that one hospital too, right? So it's entirely possible they knew each other and they were the same age.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of what I'm saying is that, like, you just never know. You know what I mean? It's a huge city, but it really ain't, And I go to Chicago all the time. And it's weird that he said Chicago, because for as big as Chicago is, Chicago don't feel that big to me. Like, LA feels massive. New York feels massive. Chicago, for some reason, doesn't feel as big to me as some of the other big cities in America. Dallas feels huge. Even Atlanta, to a certain extent, feels bigger than Chicago to me.
Now, when it came to that last episode where we talked about the libraries, it got people going. DJ Metzler sent in something. I need to push back on the Detroit library card discussion. Many people in the suburbs have grown up with co-ops for 30 years. How are we supposed to know Detroit is not part of said co-op? Lots of people started lighting me up on this one because there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the Detroit library system, in part because of the lack of programming. And then also because for some reason, and I need to follow up on this, Detroit is not part of the statewide lending program. There is a co-op in the suburbs. They do work together, but Detroit does not work with that group, does not pay in. Also, little fun fact, Detroit's library system, I think, is older than the city incorporation itself.
Yes, it is.
So there's got to be some sort of weird thing behind the scenes that kind of like influences that. But there have been a lot of pushbacks on a lot of people going, I hear what you say, Norris, but I literally did not know, because in our communities, we can go anywhere and share around and it's not a problem. So I'm going to leave this voicemail for you from listener Claire, who actually talks about a couple of things, and let's break them down.
Hey, Jared, this is Claire from Pingree Park. This is my first time using the voicemail. I thought maybe this might motivate me to actually respond, because sometimes I get behind on sending emails. So, yeah, I just listened to the show from today. First of all, I'm still cracking up that Norris described the lodge as the Autobahn, because having driven on both, I totally agree, and now that's how I'm going to refer to it from now on. So that's great. Two other quick things I wanted to comment on. The library card thing I thought was a really interesting discussion. I appreciated that you called out that this is basically a microaggression, because I didn't quite pick up on that when I was hearing about it the first time. My initial response was just like, hey, man, if you're not paying the taxes, like, you don't get to use our library unless you pay the $100, I guess. But I wanted to give an additional perspective as someone who's from Cincinnati and not Detroit, and who has worked in the Cincinnati public library system. It was my first job, best job ever. That library, the Detroit library could be so much better. Both Cincinnati and then Pittsburgh, where I've also lived, the library system is, I'm not sure if I'm using the right word, it's more like municipal. And it's the whole thing where like Detroit's the 3 counties, but in Cincinnati, it's mainly just 1 county, and same with Pittsburgh. So I think that just gets them out of a lot of issues that we have here. But like, I lived in the suburbs in Cincinnati, and I had a Cincinnati public library card, and I could go to the downtown library. I could go to like the equivalent of what would be the Grosse Pointe Library, just the different suburbs here. I could go to the Royal Oak Library, and it just all worked at everything. So I don't know if that listener comment was just like somebody who's super new to the area, but that's how it works most other places. Same with Pittsburgh. You get the Pittsburgh Public Library card. You can go to the downtown location. You can go to any of the suburbs. Like, that's normal. We're kind of weird here. I don't really understand it. I'm trying to turn a new leaf with the library system, though. I've checked out like 3 books from it in the last month, I think, and I have a couple more on hold. So despite my grievances with it, I'm trying to use it more, and I'm discovering some fun programs and workshops that the library holds. So it's not all bad. I'm trying to stay positive about it, but I do think the system could be a little less clunky and improved. I even heard from a friend who lives in Ann Arbor that their library has a 3D printer. It's crazy. If you just have the tax money that can go into it, your libraries are insane. So I can't wait to check that one out with her sometime. Second thing I wanted to comment on, I'll also try to keep this briefer, was just on the 375 project in general. I wanted to comment on an earlier show when you guys brought this up, because there was a public comment period. Me and my friends responded to it, and I just felt like, I don't know where our comments went. I feel like what they came up with was not at all what we asked for. And I don't know what everyone else asked for, but I do not want a 6-lane boulevard. I don't think we should have something that's very car focused. I think it should be more residence focused, connect the neighborhoods, have bikes, walkers, maybe have a meridian in the lane, and only have max 2 lanes on each side or something. I don't know what happened to those comments, because my friends and I commented. I felt like we had a similar experience when we commented on the Belle Isle Mobility Project. That one I'm a little bit more involved with, and I actually went in person to their Saturday listening day that they had at the Nautical Ship Museum on Belle Isle. I don't know. It was interesting, but I was also a little bit disheartened by how car centric it was. And my whole point with Belle Isle is I'm this is a park for recreation. Please consider that in your design. And their current design just completely ignores the fitness cyclists who use the island. Like, there's two different types of bikers, like ones who are casually biking and then the ones who are going like 20 miles an hour around Belle Isle. It's a very safe place to bike for that level of cyclists, and their current plan just didn't really acknowledge that.
So I'm going to stop it there because, yeah, there was a lot and some very nice things. Thank you, Claire from Pingree Park,
Yeah,
for your
we
message.
appreciate it.
100%. Let's talk about this, I think, in really maybe 2 or 3 chunks, but 2 chunks for sure. First off, the library system. Yeah, my first take is these are the kind of small things that don't get coverage that push people to move to the suburbs.
Yeah, 1,000%. First of all, I will stand corrected on how the library systems in the suburbs and in other places work. I will stand corrected on that because now when I actually think back, I spent some time working in partnership with Boston's public library system and with Minneapolis, their public library system. And it does function in many ways that Claire said, in partnership with the greater region, and, one membership covered it all. Here is the fundamental difference between here and those places. And I'm, again, going to say something that is a very, very, very hard pill and hard truth to swallow. This still is another emblematic result of the region's lack of cooperation. Now, could Detroit be doing more to make that a reality? Perhaps. But there's also a significant lack of tax revenue in the city of Detroit. We got to worry about paying police officers and fire and all that kind of stuff. There's some, I hate to put it this way, but there's some very serious immediate needs that need to be addressed in the city of Detroit before they can start worrying about the public library. That sounds messed up. That sounds awful. Should we be able to walk and chew gum at the same time? Absolutely. But as it stands right now, I don't think that's that much of a possibility. So I think it falls on the suburbs, if this is something that is truly something that they desire, to perhaps extend the olive branch. I don't think that'll happen because I've never seen it in my lifetime, and I don't think I ever will see it in my lifetime, of true programmatic cooperation between the city and the suburbs. A lot of that is race-based. A lot of that is just those weird historical we don't knows. But as my partner, my wife always says, when you don't like somebody and you just say, I just don't know, maybe there's something you're not saying to the rest of us.
I do want to add, though, that there's a lot of political discord over the years. And this is one of those things where, and this is going to be really unpopular probably, I'm not sure there needs to be so many library systems in general. Right?
Facts.
I understand home rule and everything, but should every one of these suburbs have a library system? Should this just be county and then county coordinated between multiples? This comes up with another we've talked about this geographic devil before. In a lot of cities, the county kind of mostly surrounds the city, so the growth happens in the same county and then it goes out. Here, the heart of our region is across 3 counties.
Yeah.
And that makes for a logistical political nightmare.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I mean, is that there's no reason why the library system shouldn't be all under one umbrella in Wayne County, right? This should all be
the very
Detroit.
least, yeah.
At the very least, this should all be the Detroit Public Library System, but it's not. Because how you gonna square that hole with Livonia, which was a sundown town up until, I don't know, the 70s?
The hard truth is, everything in Metro Detroit does, people are gonna hate me for this too, but after 25 years, what I've learned, everything in Metro Detroit at some point, one way or another, ties back to race and inequity. All of our suburbs, you may not be a racist, but all of our suburbs, almost all of them, were created and delineated with racism as the backdrop, exclusionism. And things like public libraries are a perfect example of that. Same thing with school districts, things like that.
Yeah, 1,000%. And by the way, I appreciate the comment 1,000% because I do think it represents a reality that, if there was will here, that Detroit could get to. And I really wish for that because, I think it does the entire region, and it does people who want to use any of the libraries a disservice by not having them all connected. But I just don't see it as a reality because of the historical context of how our cities and counties are even made up. And I think, number one, it does go into transit, but I just think, not being from here, there's just a little bit of context that you're not going to get, and that's fair, and I'm not blaming you for that. But that is a part of that reasoning.
Well, and with transit, look, I understand politically it's impossible. So I don't beat the drum about it. But in reality, we should not have two transit systems. We should not have, it should just be one system. There shouldn't be SMART. There shouldn't be a DDOT. It should just be the RTA or something like it.
Mm-hmm.
The city can't afford the transit system, and the suburbs really can't. Neither one is funding transit to the level. I saw a thread about well, what about Minneapolis? And it's interesting you mentioned that. But Minneapolis about, why do they have so much transit? We don't.
They have two full-blown cities that cooperate with each other, that sit right next to each other and share the expense.
And they spend 2.5 times per person funding it. The problem with Metro Detroit Transit is just that we don't fund it. It's that simple. And we don't fund it for a variety of reasons, but you get what you pay for. And it's the same thing with these libraries. You look at Ann Arbor, you look at Grosse Pointe, whatever, they get what they pay for. So that's a question that we have to ask, in Detroit, what makes sense and what the priorities are. And you're absolutely right. That's part of the challenge. And it means telling people politically no. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. And that extends to the second part of the call. I appreciate and I get it, causation is not reason for perpetuation, but it's just going to be so difficult in the city proper to just even change the ideas and attitudes around car centrism. The 375 project, I agree. I don't think anybody from the city is happy about the proposal that was put forth to the folks. I think a 6-lane mini highway is just as ridiculous as the highway itself. Does it make it slightly better because it's a surface street? I don't know, maybe. But that's still a missed opportunity to connect those neighborhoods. So I agree there, but it is difficult to get the legislature that has, let's be honest, had a serious thumb put over it by the big three for, 100 years. And also would require a pretty major ideological shift. So for me, I haven't necessarily even seen the emergence of pro-transit politicians and candidates for people to get behind.
You can't assume a Democrat's your ally on this one.
Exactly.
I'm just being very honest. There's a few standouts like Mallory McMurrow's talked about transit, things like that, but she's a lot younger. I've been at recent events. Everybody's focused on autonomous because they know we don't have the money for the other stuff.
Exactly.
We just don't. It's again going to be that private-public partnership because again, we don't raise enough money. There isn't enough value there to raise from to get there.
And then, by the way, you've already got, city council people toying with the idea of removing property taxes off the, charter.
I saw that. And I heard your words in my head. Not every Democrat's a Democrat in a city where everybody's the same party. Same thing for Republicans.
Exactly. And that's sort of my thing is that, when we love the idea of transit. We love the idea of a mobile region. But at the end of the day, the Q line is working because the city ain't paying for it, period. To get anything that resembles true regional transit, it would have to be taken out of the hands of SMART, out of the hands of DDOT. It would have to be a private-public partnership. And to be perfectly honest, it would have to be a shift so seismic in the sort of culture of Metro Detroit that I just see all those things as just huge barriers. Dan Gilbert might be able to fund a few more lines for the Q line throughout the city, but it's a wrap on thinking that's about to go all the way out to the suburbs. You might get it to the airport, you might get it to Ann Arbor, but anything north, nah.
And you're seeing this with some law changes that push towards BRT and dedicated lanes. That's what you're going to see. When it comes to that I-375 thing, an Outlier piece came out. Aaron Mondry, friend of the show, talked about how basically this proposal is locked. It's like 90% locked.
Yeah.
There will be no changes along those lines. And that comment period was going to affect 5% of it.
Oh, to say we did it. Yeah.
And as I experience more and more of it, it's like, oh, okay, well, listen, we just need to make sure the traffic for the Lions games and the casino goes through. And that's our priority.
Mm-hmm.
Love your thoughts. Voicemails, keep them coming. 313-789-3211. That's 313-789-3211. Feedback, as always, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Norris, I appreciate your perspectives, man.
I appreciate coming on and being able to share them.
With that, I am Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.